the people that hang out at the carnival with boomerangs after hours.
I prefer a chili carnet.
Mm-hmm.
It's complete and grass.
Well, if it just got out of prison, then it's a chili con carne.
Chili ex-con carne.
People that hang out at the carnival. That's right, chili ex-con carne.
I will say all the practice from audiobooks has made me much better. I had allowed my narration skills to get a little soft, but I've been doing that as audiobooks, and boy, I had a script come in yesterday. I knocked it out in like 8 minutes.
Well, I wouldn't have the stamina to do an audiobook. I'd get about 3 pages in, go, well, I'm bored.
Yeah, it depends on how good the book is. I have to admit, the first one that I read was a slog to get through. But no, I just find it fascinating. It's an interesting, different thing.
And it does leave kind of a legacy for you, so it's kind of great in that respect.
Yeah, I don't think my performances are up to the point where everybody's going to go, "Wow, did you hear him?" It's just a whole different thing. You're just.
I remember Bill Davis when he was reading audiobooks.
It does remind me about the early days of broadcast, though, when you do a work and then it would take a long time before it actually got on the air. Now I can do a spot, throw it up to the web, whoever's putting it on their site can put it up. And, 5 minutes after you do it, it can be global. Used to be that it would be a couple of weeks, maybe a month before everything got out there. Approval stages, sending tapes back and forth. That is different. And that was a lesson for me about the dipping my toe into Instagram. I put one of my Comic-Con photos up there, and I clicked it. I thought, I think I got everything right, and I clicked send. And the next thing I know, bing, 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 my computer starts binging.
Go, people were friending you or downloading it?
They were sharing it. And I was like, yeah. And I wasn't used to the almost nanoseconds between posting and that reaction.
Was that a function of streams or?
No, I think Instagram, when people see something, they're conditioned to hitting like. And as the poster, you get a ping when somebody likes the work. So it was just weird to have connected those two things. Click, ping, ping.
Instant
ping,
reaction.
Ping, ping. What?
Instant reaction. You picked a good time of day.
Yeah, and you're a little bit freaked out. Like, what did I do? Did I do something wrong? Why is this pinging at me so much? That just shows I just haven't played in that.
Well, they were beautiful photos. It was really nice.
Oh, thank you. It was fun shooting them. It's always a great excuse to crawl around Comic-Con and have something to do.
But the takeaway is that your soft skills in interacting with people and able to pull them away and put them behind nice backdrops was terrific.
I think prescient of you to understand that, because that is the hard thing to learn. That was what was so difficult for me the first time I walked up to somebody and said, I know you're doing something else, but do you mind if you leave that and come over here with me and do something else? It's a hard thing to ask people in a public circumstance.
Different with a big camera. When you do it with your iPhone, that takes extra soft skills.
Well, that's why I do those kinds of things. You learn things you don't learn anywhere else.
Yeah, wonderful.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about all things digital, so digital media production. So add your questions there. And our second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're going to talk about carnets. Many of you probably don't know what a carnet is, but if you carry a bunch of gear back and forth between different countries, you'll learn quickly. So we're going to talk to the specialists. This is we have specialists from Boomerang. I have used them for years, decades, or over a decade, and they are just the best. So we're going to bring them in and answer your questions about getting gear in and out of countries seamlessly. So definitely stay tuned and think about the questions that you have about that. We sent out some links in the email, so you can look and do a little bit more research. But ask those questions. Be ready to ask those questions for the second hour, and for that first hour, make sure to throw your questions into Mukana. And ask the questions there and vote on those questions so we know what order you'd like us to answer them in. Let's go ahead and jump into those questions. Robert, what do we have?
Thank you, Alex. We begin with Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. Indiana House Bill 1167 requires government live streaming in Indiana. Thoughts?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I think it's a good idea because it kind of improves transparency on the wheels of government. The bill, I don't know if it's passed yet, but the proposal says that governing bodies of the state and local agencies, excluding state-supported colleges and universities, are to provide a publicly accessible platform, live transmission of public meetings, and an archive and copies of the transmissions with links to the meeting agencies. So I think it's great because it exposes the, behind what used to be done in the smoke-filled room of politicians, back rooms of politics and deal making. It kind of brings that out into the light. If everyone in that meeting knows that they are being streamed live, it would expose a lot of stuff and maybe clean politics up a little bit. So I would be in favor of it if I were an Indianian.
Go ahead, Bill.
I generally agree with that. I do think there is one concern which is that legislators will start learning to play to the cameras rather than play to their constituents or whatever, and they will, I can see some of the worst of the people in that industry going, "Hey, I can build a national profile by doing something outrageous and getting a lot of news headlines because everybody's watching." So if we can tamp that down and get to the people where people are still doing their legislating and just the cameras are watching, it becomes second nature, then great.
Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's a good thing to do because I think that it's important that people are able to not have to go somewhere but can simply just turn this on. What is going on? I think this is also the beginning, whether the government does it or not. Once they start live streaming it, this gets back into some of the uses that we've talked about with AI, with the ability to pull those videos in, process those videos, summarize those videos, translate those videos. All those things are going to happen relatively seamlessly, and I think people will start experimenting with Indiana. But as far as government transparency, I think it's going to make a huge difference. Now, next question.
John Fisher from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma asks, is there a way to make virtual cameras like OBS Virtual Cam show up in Apple Keynote when adding live video to a slide? Only physically connected and AirPlay devices are showing up in the dropdown.
Go ahead, Jason.
This is a tricky one. There's a way to do it with localhost, and if you add it to media, if you get a URL that is localhost, you can add it to media, and I think that would work as a live input, but it's not actually going to be called live video.
So it doesn't. I guess so we just out of curiosity, it doesn't show Siphon. So a Siphon handoff doesn't work on a Mac or in. Keynote?
I don't think it does. No.
Okay. That's interesting. We should probably make some requests. So it seems like something we would want to do. Next question.
Eric Hers from Hartford, Connecticut is asking, I have a Blackmagic ATA Mini Pro with USB output to a PC as a Zoom virtual camera plus live streaming output to a broadcast server. How should I add redundancy to each element of the production workflow?
At this scale, it's hard. Go ahead, Courtney.
Sorry, I was fighting my way back to the screen. I was thinking maybe the Blackmagic web interface, you could run the HDMI output, program output out of the Blackmagic, out of the Mini, ATEM Mini, and run that through the web interface. And that would give you another USB output of your switcher. And a second web interface. You could go to a second streaming location. streaming server to broadcast as well. So you'd have at least one level of backup. However, if the ATEM goes down, then everything goes down. So there's that. You're not completely covered with a dual backup. And the only way to do that would be to split all of your video inputs into your ATEM switcher and have two ATEM minis online. That would be a full backup, but that would be kind of tricky to do.
Yeah, you definitely could do that. I mean, I think that one of the things you keep on looking at where, at certain scales, you have to look at where adding redundancy will actually destabilize the system. So you have to be careful of not adding, with a larger one, what we would say is, I mean, oftentimes we've had routers and then we cross route those to make those, to be able to have that redundancy built in. And then we'll use patch bays on the back end to tie the routers together so that if we needed to jump from one router to another, we could do it relatively seamlessly. Obviously, a lot of times we have two switchers in production. And so but with the minis, it's hard because you just don't have a lot of I/O. So I think that one of the things we have been requesting, I don't think it's quite there yet, is the idea of having something like Mix Effect Pro be able to talk to two switchers at one time. So it can send out those commands to both switchers. Now, if you did, you could do something like that most likely in Companion right now, where you'd have it send off two instructions to two different IPs to basically keep those switchers in sync as you're going through it. But as soon as you start doing something complex, it's going to be hard. Like and now with those switchers, they're probably not that, you're not going to be doing that many complex moves. So it should be okay. As far as now, what we do for streaming is even with this show, this is two of the elemental links. They're each getting a signal, and then they're sending primary and backup into AWS. And then that's sending to a primary and backup inside of YouTube. So those are that's how that's stacked there. So anyway, so those are that's how we stack those there themselves. That should work. And then, of course, virtual cameras would be another PC if you wanted total backup. So you could build two parallel systems that worked. I think that you'd probably be destabilized. I think if you're going to go that route, you probably need to start building up a bigger kit. Now, what I would do, and what I do often, is keep things in a bag. So I would have an extra camera, an extra Mini Pro. I'd have them configured the same way. I could swap something in and out, but I think I'd be more likely to have what we call a crikey box with some of the extra hardware in it that I need to make a quick change, and I would know how to do that. I think I would do that over building this, because I think that what we're talking about right now would actually create enough complexity that it would probably reduce the overall stability of the system. Go ahead, John.
You could run a PC with a Blackmagic card in and out, and then loop that through the ATM and have that as a backup, like running vMix or OBS as a failsafe.
But that would be just another. But something is still something's still in the string. So if one of those things failed, you'd still lose the other one. So you kind of have to split at the cameras to make that work. And again, I think that you'd be building up a pretty complex pipeline that would probably be harder to wield and be more likely to have errors than just having the backups in a box that you know how to use. One of the biggest things with stability is using the hardware often. That's one of the reasons that I like what I'm doing here, is I'm constantly using that software so that you can see what the anomalies are and see if there's anything going on in a controlled environment. Using it outdoors all the time and putting it in bad situations is not going to make it more stable, but using it a lot so that you understand what's going on and you see any kind of anomalies is really useful. A lot of times the stuff for event producers, if they're not doing enough events, they don't know, or they haven't seen an anomaly that's starting to arise within something because they used it 2 months ago, and then another time, and the next month, and another time. When you're using it every day or 2 or 3 times a week, you have a much better sense of what the trends are. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, I read that voiceover animation work is allowed during SAG-AFTRA strike. Without a final soundtrack, how would the animators properly sync the character mouth movements to the script? Would a tool like MetaCumin be used?
Go ahead, Jason.
A really easy old school way to do this would be Adobe Character Animator. That basically just grafts from your face and pulls from video. Sure, there's a better way, but that's the simple way.
Good, Bill.
Yeah, the strike hasn't affected the animation industry very much at all. And as a matter of fact, actors who are covered under the contract terms that are on strike can actually work in voiceover now, not for under the theatrical contract. So if it's a movie or something like that, then you are theoretically prohibited. If you're working on something like an audiobook, there is no preclusion. That's why some actors are moving over to do that. The sync part of it is just going to work exactly as normal, because anybody who has to do that kind of work outside of those contracts will do it the same way they were doing it before, and anybody inside those contracts will simply not be doing any work, so the syncing doesn't matter to them at all.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, this frequently happens in animated stuff, even when there's not a strike, is they won't have cast a certain character yet or decided on a certain character. And since the lead time on animation is so long, they have to get started. They've designed the character, but they haven't settled on a voice yet. A lot of times the animator will do a temp voice, and they will record all the dialogue by the animator themselves doing the part. And they will actually video that animator, and they will do the animation based on the animator's reaction and voice. And then later, when they hire an actor, they will come in and do ADR and replace the animator's original voice, like they do in a lot of movies where they replace a character's voice because they don't like the character's voice, with a sync ADR session where it's tougher for the actor because they can't put their own spin on things, and they may reanimate some stuff once they cast the thing with a real actor. But if they're still negotiating contracts or something and they have to get that sequence finished, they'll animate to a temp voice, and then they'll have to match the actor that they are eventually hired to mount it in post production. They'll sync it up.
And I think that one of the reasons they want to make sure the actors can do this is that long pipeline, because a lot of times the voices are recorded before the animation. And so if they're doing them before the animation, then it's another year of animating. So I think that there's a concern that the effect of having someone not able to record the voice tracks is something that's a year out sometimes. And so that becomes really problematic as well. It's going to be really interesting. I think that the dates that are Labor Day is being kicked around as a point of no return. Like everything starts to really change. I mean, everything's uncomfortable right now, and the industry starts to shift pretty hard after Labor Day. So we'll see how long this lasts. Next question.
Andy Korkendorfer from Viera, Florida is asking for thoughts on Stand With Production freelance group unionizing with IATSE. Group includes TV commercial production assistants, assistant production supervisors, production supervisor, line producers.
Go ahead, Bill.
These are some of the specific positions that I'm a little concerned with, because they are the most likely to have these new AI-driven things kind of affect them. So it wouldn't surprise me that one of the reasons there's a push for more union protection in there is because they see the potential for ChatGPT and things like that to kind of get in the way of what they're doing. More automated tools there are, the more less need there is for production assistants and those kind of things. So it's just something of concern.
Yeah, this just happened, I think, over the last couple of days. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I haven't read what the deets are yet, but it's interesting. The commercial contract is a different contract than the ones that people are striking now. So the commercial people that are, union members, IATSE members, is not on strike at all right now, but they could observe, the SAG and Writers Guild picket lines. But it's a separate contract for commercial production with IATSE, so it's negotiated separately than the general contract. And a lot of times, production assistants are the most exploited people on the set. They're usually working for $100, $125 a day flat, and so they may end up working a 12-hour day for $125. So it's about time they unionized. And assistant production supervisors, I don't know if that's been a union position in the past, but I guess not. And line producers are normally members of the PGA, not the IATSE, so Producers Guild. So I'm not sure why they would come under this particular group, but any group can form an IATSE, a separate IATSE group underneath the umbrella of the international. We had a mechanics local semi-technicians group in Austin, which worked on films and video back in the 70. So it is possible. And so I'm glad they're organizing to finally get some reimbursement for all those production assistants that are working long, long, long hours for little pay.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, UPerfect has introduced the UGame J5 17.3-inch portable 4K monitor, which has a 1500 to 1 contrast ratio, compared to their previous monitor, which has only 1000 to 1. Would a higher contrast ratio be helpful for editing or mostly for grading and color work?
Go ahead, Jason.
I actually think a higher contrast ratio by itself is not useful for either. Higher contrast ratio is the difference between the darkest dark and the brightest bright. So maybe outdoor visibility, but unless you're going to add color accuracy, my immediate thought is no.
Yeah, it's. I'm not sure what you. It's a lot of a cost for a portable monitor. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I didn't see what the price is, but it is one of those portable Oops, sorry. Hello. I need that backup switcher. It is that portable, folding cover portable monitor, which I'm looking at one right now. And usually, they're LED backlights, so they're not AMOLED. So getting that high contrast ratio doesn't really mean much. And a lot of times they lie about you'll see 1,000,000 to 1 listed as the contrast ratio. So I would take the 1,500 to 1 with a grain of salt. It depends on the angle and if it's an IPS panel or not. Usually they almost always are. But that's a decent contrast ratio if it's true, but I doubt it's true.
You go, Bill.
Yeah, the thing that's of interest to me, if I was working in a shop, I would not care about this at all. As a one-man band, sometimes I have noticed that better tools means that you notice things. If I'm editing something and I notice that there's a contrast issue or something else, that only an HDR-capable monitor that does a good job of showing me what I'm working on, then it's helpful. So I think the one-man band type, as these things become less and less costly, it's better to have a better monitor so that once you school yourself to watch for things like contrast, and color accuracy, you have a tool that does all of that, not just one thing.
I think that the issue is that what they're showing in a lot of the demos on their page is that you're putting your palettes on your main screen and and then you're using their screen as the color screen. And I would be hard pressed to say that their screen is going to be more accurate than my MacBook Pro. So if you have, it depends on what you have, but they're showing, I think, a MacBook Pro there, and I'm kind of like, well, I don't know if I would do that. And so I think that the Apple screens tend to be very accurate. And so I think I'd have a hard time. And I think the problem is I don't spend a lot on extra screens. I have a couple screens that are color accurate that I spend money on, but I don't, like my second screen on a laptop would not be the thing that I would probably, unless it's in my office and it's a really nice one. I feel like I'd be hard pressed to spend extra on it. It does look like a nice monitor. If you're traveling and you want a high end monitor, it's 4K, 60 hertz. It's got, it is bright. It looks like it's well made. So, I mean, if you just want a really nice portable monitor, I think it works. It's pretty pricey for what it does. Go ahead, Courtney.
It has a high contrast ratio, supposedly, but it's only 400 nits. So it's not super HDR.
It's on HDR. It's kind of HDR, but it's not really.
Yeah. And it doesn't, and I think it's an edge lit backlight.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's local dimming to get the high contrast ratio that you will find in better displays. We'll have many LEDs as a backlight that have local dimming, and they give you a much higher contrast ratio.
The website's not totally done either. It has an enjoy the vivid picture, and it shows how great 1,000 to 1 to 700 to 1 is. But underneath it says 1,500 to 1. so it's like they're not quite. They might want to finish that image. At least change the numbers. All right.
You could describe it as HDR-ish.
HDR-ish. Yeah, exactly. All right. Next question.
Alok Lopez, Waterman, Brevard, North Carolina. How do you deal with incessant noise, 60 cycle and others on a ClearCom intercom system? It's mind-numbing.
So some of that is nulling. So you have to null that system out. So someone has to, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, there are devices that you called humbuckers that you can put on that isolate the ground from any microphone inputs. ClearClam systems, since a lot of times people are plugging in these things to power supplies at different parts of the building, so they don't have the common ground between them. So they're going to generate 60 hertz hum because of ground loops that happen between cable interconnected intercom systems. This is another good reason to go with wireless intercoms because you won't have ground loop issues. Then you only have to deal with the shields on your headset cable to the wireless transmitter of your ClearCom system. Then if you get some hum, otherwise, yeah, anytime you have a wired intercom system, it's going to pick up a lot of extraneous hum.
Okay, good, Bill.
Yeah, you can never tell how the building's wired. So whenever I heard that on a ClearCom or something like that, the first thing I do is take the ClearCom base station, run an extension cord, a stinger to it, and see if I can find a different plug that makes the hum go away. Sometimes it's as simple as that because people wire buildings in the weirdest ways possible. You just want to get on the same ground leg.
Yeah, because basically the voltage always wants to go home, and if it finds out that your comm system is the fastest way home, it's going to use it, and so so I think that the one of the big things that does create buzz at the beginning is someone nulling, and then what happens is if they add an analog headset to that system after they've nulled, they got to null it again. Like you have to have the entire system in place before you null the system. So a lot of times when you hear some of this buzz, it's because they keep on adding or subtracting, which changes what's going on, and so they have to. You have to re-null it every time you change the number of belt packs if you're going to really avoid some of that. The other side of that is, for instance, using things that are more IP based. So for smaller kits, we use Dante. So for the smaller kits, up to about 8 belt packs, I find that using a lot of belt packs on Dante is hard because what a comm system does for you is that you don't think about it when you use it, but it's building all these mixed minuses for you. You know, you minus yourself, and so you don't hear yourself come back through the system. When you have when you do it yourself with Dante, you realize, I got to build a mix minus for every person. So there are some boxes that Studio Technologies makes that a little easier. We also use mixers. Like sometimes we'll dedicate a whole mixer to like an X32 to just managing mix minuses for a Dante comm system. So those are things that can be done, but it can get a little difficult and tricky because now you're building groups inside of that as well. So it really turns into if you're not going to change it very often, it works pretty well. But when we're at 4 to 8 belt packs, Dante makes it great. It's perfectly clean. We use the Studio Technology belt packs. There's 2-channel and 4-channel, and they work great. So that's one of the things to think about. Analog is just, they're slowly working their way out of the system, but they're still in a handful of productions that we see. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, how do you use a single stream URL on YouTube and 2 redundant input sources?
Yeah. So what happens in YouTube is they have a primary and a backup ingest point. So while it's only one video that goes out, you have one that's backup, a B, usually is what it's called, I think, or at the end of the URL. So it's the same stream key, but it's 2 different URLs connected to that stream key. And then that's going to put both those in. Now, primarily it's going to work on your primary input. And if that loses, if it becomes degraded, it will switch over to B. Now, you have to remember that it doesn't do that at the ingest, so it may not. There may be something else in the pipeline, so you could end up with a percentage of your audience on B and a percentage of your audience on A. And the other thing is if you fail somewhere in the middle, you may end up in a situation where it switches over to B and you think you're on A. So one of the things that we have to be careful of is making sure that those 2 streams are identical. Now, if you want it to be completely seamless, you need to take those 2 encoders and do what we call output locking. So this locks the generation of those frames perfectly. And when that happens, without that, you'll see it wait for the next segment. So it'll go, oh, I lost a feed and now I'm going to jump to the next one. When they're output locked, typically it'll do a seamless, and the viewer will never know that something popped out. So we do that pretty often. And again, this show, for instance, is primary backup to AWS, and then AWS. So we have 2 encoders that are encoding to AWS, and then on the way out, it's sending out 2 streams to YouTube. So that's how we manage that. Next question.
Roy Myers from Bel Air, Maryland is asking, what do you use to back up your iPhone? I've tried iMazing. There are other tools. What's your favorite?
Go, Jason.
Amazing is definitely the best one for use and playing around with getting good output. Yeah, there really isn't anything better than iMazing.
What do you back up on your iPhone? I'm just curious. Like, what do people back up?
What do I back up on?
I don't
my
back
iPhone?
up anything. I don't back up my iPhone. I don't. My iPhone is in iCloud. I mean, it's backed up in iCloud. So
my iPhone is in iCloud. I use Mac OS to do a hard backup because that will back up the entire secure enclave. So you have to have another set of backup in order to fully restore things like your health kit. Personally, I don't, but I've used iMazing, for example, for attorneys where they need to look and capture, a secure PDF of text message exchange, and they need a good chain of evidence for that. And that I have used iMazing to do.
Got it. Good, Robert.
I use it to back up photos. And if I traveling or something and I want to take a whole chunk of photos and put it in a particular folder and then load it into Lightroom, it's a little convenient that way, and I can use it as a project.
So you use iMazing instead of photos, or you use iMazing to just pull them all off?
I pull them all off and then get them into my folder structure that I put into Lightroom.
Got it. Okay, very good. Next question.
From Matt Halverson, Brookings, South Dakota. Someone asked me how to replace a background in a picture quickly so they could print the picture out from his phone while manning a booth at the county fair. I suggested a projector as the background instead of green screen. Any suggestions?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I wouldn't use a projector because if you're at a county fair, you don't really have a lot of control over the light. And so you might want to use a 60-inch monitor if you can haul it and set it up in the behind the person in the booth, and then put whatever background you want to on the monitor. As long as the monitor is big enough to cover the background, that would be a little bit better. And but if you're outdoors, that's going to be even problematic because then you have to deal with reflections off the surface of the monitor and so on. In which case, you're going back to green screen. So you'd have to find a green screen program that runs on that iPhone in order to do the composite from a green screen. You guys that know, maybe if it's an iPhone, I don't know that much about iPhone apps that are available, but I'm sure there must be one that will let you put a different background in behind you and key out a green screen.
Hey, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, in fact, on iPhones now, if you just press and hold on the background, they've built intelligence in the last couple of updates where it'll determine the background and the subject. That's part of the intelligence now with AI. And then you can remove the background. You can copy the background out as a separate thing, pull it over to an iPad or an iPhone or a computer or whatever, paste that in against a different background. It should be pretty easy. So iOS actually does this really well and really efficiently now.
I've been thinking about this problem for a long time. For whatever reason, for maybe 15 years, I've thought it would be great to have that exactly what you're talking about. I haven't thought about it for the county fair, but I was thinking about it in malls or something else where you could. There's a place in San Francisco at the Wharf that you can go in and take pictures, and it's like you hanging. You can go all over San Francisco, and they've got props, so you can like hang off the end of a cable car, and you can be standing on the bridge, and you can do all these other fun things. And they just shoot you in front of green screen with the props in front, so that what sells it a lot of times is the thing you're holding on to really looks real. So that makes it look a lot better. So that's something to think about as well. But I've often thought that it'd be really fun to have a background that you could. I would still use probably green screen if I could control the experience, and then be able to have LED lights. And this used to be a lot harder than it is now. That would change in color so that it would match your lighting to the background. So that it would automatically just change the color and angle of all the lights. You could build kind of a dome in the front that would kind of light you up for that, and it could be film or video or still. I think that'd be a lot of fun. But it is if you can control the light, then that means like taking what I would probably do is have it be dark. Have some kind of tent that you go into that has a background. And in that case, I probably use green screen. Otherwise, a monitor is going to work better. If you have it opened, it's going to be impossible to do anything, make anything work. Vignetting, as said before, is going to be the biggest problem. The projectors just don't work. Go ahead, Jason.
Portrait Light Mono in iOS does a decent job of this. I mean, here it is in real time, just putting me against black, but that's only half the issue. So who knows?
Yeah, you got to comp it. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and I would actually avoid doing it on a phone. I'd set up a camera, even if it's a 4-year-old Canon still camera, and hook that up and composite through an ATEM Mini or something. So have some equipment there, because if people see you just doing it on the phone and the phone is automatically replacing the background with a built-in app, people are going to say, well, why should I pay you $10 to create this picture when I can just do it on my iPhone, without any extra hardware? So,
yeah, I mean, there is a
problem.
Well, and the other thing, though, is that you can also, with Canon cameras specifically, you can pull those images off automatically. So you can plug a Canon camera into a computer and have it just fire off. I know that someone's trying to do it. This is probably kind of a fun thing. They have an iPhone. They have a printer. They're like, hey, we can just print these off. It'll be fun. And it might work just fine. Again, I'd probably think about if you're just doing it if this is kind of a fun thing at a county fair that's part of some other booth or something like that, then I would probably, I think the iPhone will work. I think you would probably try to find backgrounds. I would try to find backgrounds that just I can click and remove with the iPhone tools rather than trying to figure out anything else. If I'm going to keep it if I'm going to make it something that's a fun little trick that people enjoy, stick with the iPhone tools to just do to do that. If you're going to really turn it into something that you want to charge people for, then what I would do is I get a camera that the Canon specifically are really good at. You can wire them up to a system that'll just pull those images off in real time. In fact, they'll fire the camera at the same time. And what you can do there is that you can automate all of that. So you can automate all the compositing process so that you click the photo and the image just comes out the other end. So if you frame it correctly, you won't see it ahead of time, but if you get good at it, you get it framed up on a tripod, you'll just be hitting the photo on the camera. And this is how they do a lot of the kind of the kids stuff for sports is they can process that stuff either in real time or a little bit later. But you can batch process that, or you can do it in real time where it'll just pass through it. Because if you get the green screen just right, it's a very simple math. You basically average the red and the blue, you subtract those from the green, that's your matte. and then you use that to despill it. You then you increase the contrast to key it, and you put the background in, and that's it. And it's a really simple. It's like 26 lines of code. Not that I've ever done it. Go ahead, Bill.
I actually have an example of this because I did that with one of my Comic-Con portraits. This actually, she's not in that location. I took one of the pictures of her and I just touched her on my iPhone. It did that matte of her. Let me actually zoom into this, and composited her against that other photo, which is a clean plate that I had shot. It was pretty remarkably good. It kind of blew me away. I have not done the color balance between the background color and her color. She needs to be retouched. But in terms of an instant key on a phone where she was in a similar busy background, it blew me away.
And it would probably do even better if you gave it a basic background that you figured out, like, what is the phone like? Like it might be green, it might be something else, but what is the phone like to pull a key from? And that's going to help. And that thing being pretty far behind it, because remember, if you're using a newer iPhone, it's using that LiDAR to make some decisions as well. And so, you can, making sure that there's a little distance there can help. A quick reminder that, of course, you can ask questions throughout the first hour. So if you have more questions for us for the first hour or the second hour, when we start talking about shipping gear around, go ahead and throw those into Makana. Next question.
We continue with Henry Ramos, Yonkers, New York. What's the latest recommendation for budget earphones long enough to reach around your laptop with mic built in, similar to old wired Apple earphones, for clients using bad earbuds and built-in mics?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Now, this is at the risk of being really, really cheap. I've bought this twice. These called Kira Baby earbuds. You get 5 of them for $14. Actually, I think they were $10.99 when I bought them last. And I buy these as disposable. They're actually pretty good. They've got silicone wires on them. They're really strong. And they're TRRS type 1/8 inch wiring, eighth inch plug on the end of them. So if you have any phone or computer, which is designed for a single plug for headphones and microphone. And these are the set of headphones. I'm constantly losing these. So this is why I buy them by 5 at a time. And, I'll leave them in the shirt pocket or something and they'll go through the laundry. So I'm not concerned if they're only about $3 a piece. And this is the one I used when we did Cinegear, when I was walking around the day before, and everyone's complimented me on the quality of the sound of my microphone, which was just a little mic built into this headset as I was walking around Cinegear. So I don't know what it sounds like because I've never heard the other end of it, but people tell me it sounds quite good. It has a button on it to change, to click your media player and turn it on or off, or to answer your phone. But the sound of the headphones sound actually pretty good, and the quality of the cabling and everything is quite good for the price. You can't beat $14 for 5 of them.
Go, Jason.
No, I can't beat $14 for 5. Anything with a TRRS is going to do a pretty decent job here. Marshall makes decent ones. The Sennheiser CX 80S is also a decent alternative. They're pretty indestructible if you don't lose them.
Next question.
Adrian Watkins from Wellington, New Zealand writes, current Zoom setup is separate paths for audio via Mix Pre and video via ATEM Mini. Any benefit in combining the audio in via the ATEM?
There is. One of the things is sync. So if you go out of your Mini or something else directly into the ATEM, your sync will be probably perfect because now it's managing the audio and the video at the same time. Oftentimes the audio is a little bit faster than the video. So if you go through the switcher and then you bring the audio in separately, you have to have some way to delay that audio so that it catches back up. And that has a whole effect on for instance, the latency of how we talk back and forth. So we really are always trying to minimize that. So that is one advantage. Another advantage is if you have audio sources that are coming in over the ATEM that are from different computers, you may want to have your voice mixed into that so that you can talk over those. So let's say you're going to play a video, but you want to talk over that video and you want the audio to come out of the computer. You can have both of those going into the ATEM and mixing your audio and your voice and whatever's playing out together interactively on the ATEM software might be a little bit easier. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, there's a couple of gotchas here. If you're bringing audio into the ATEM Mini over the analog inputs, which is the TRS mini plugs, you're bringing it in analog that way. And you should probably bring it in at line level, not microphone level. So you should plug the output of your Mix Pre line output of the Mix Pre into the mini plug. And if you come in the analog way, you do have the ability to delay that audio in the ATEM software. So you can go into the audio section of the ATEM software and adjust the delay up to, I think, 20 milliseconds or so that you can align it back up sync-wise there. But if you do come in through a camera, let's say with an HDMI port, if you come in digitally over an HDMI signal, which is another way to get audio into your ATEM Mini, you don't have the ability to delay it. So only the analog inputs can be delayed to resynchronize it. But you're less likely to be out of sync if you come in at the camera with the camera's audio input port anyway and come in over the HDMI, because then it interlaces the audio into the HDMI signal and sends it over at the same time. So they're less likely to get out of sync anyway.
Next question.
From Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas, compare Melee versus the Dell series of tiny computers that run Windows 11 with comparable prices.
Courtney, have you used them? Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
I haven't gotten and looked at any of the Dell Minis. Intel just announced recently they're going to discontinue their NUCs, which is kind of disappointing. The NUCs have always been from Intel themselves, have always been kind of a reference design that other companies base their mini computer designs on. But I think they're going to stop selling the NUCs as a separately available thing from Intel. So I have not looked at the Dell series of tiny computers, although it is a burgeoning market. It's, for people that just want to, point of sale devices, cash registers, receptionist desks, those kind of, the little Melee computers, the stick computers work great. You can mount them on a VESA mount on the back of the on the back of the monitor, and it's a full Windows computer. So any kind of accounting software, calendar software, or whatever kind of software you're going to run that runs on Windows will run on them. And unless you're doing some type of high-speed 3D rendering or something, these quad-core Atom-based, or now Intel Gen 12-based chipsets are completely adequate for doing that kind of stuff. So I would imagine the Dell would compare quite well with the Melee. I like the Melee's ability to do compact stuff, because you can put actually an NVMe 4 terabyte drive inside this and have 2 HDMI outputs and all the ports you need. So I'll have to take a look at Dell, and we'll see. But Dell, I'm sure, will be more expensive than the Chinese-made. Well, they're probably made in China anyway, but Chinese-made and marketed Melee computers.
Next question.
From Roy Myers, Bel Air, Maryland. Your current favorite external drive for a Mac. The previous recommendation of a Samsung T5 is not available. Are the T7s okay now?
Good, Bill.
I moved from I used to use those Samsungs, but when they had that problem with the T5s versus the T7s, specifically for backing up my Blackmagic 6K, not just backing up, but writing files to it, I switched to these OWC Envoy bases. They put an NVMe card in them. And the thing I like about it is, like a regular hard drive, you can increase capacity over the course of time. So I think I started out with a 500 gigabyte drive, and I needed a little more, so I just swapped the internal drive out to 1 terabyte. I think they go up to at least 2 terabytes, maybe more. So these are super fast. They've been reliable for me up to this point, so I've gone with that form factor rather than those old drives.
Go ahead, Jason.
The OWC Envoys are great. My favorite for computer, not for recording with USB-C, is the OWC Thunderblade. Thunderblade goes up to 2,800 megabytes per second, and I think Alex has the newer version of this, but it basically is just a bunch of NVMEs, and you can RAID them in together, and they're pretty fast.
Yeah, there's an M2 enclosure that OWC makes that I like a lot. I don't have it quite. I was trying to grab onto it. It's not quite in reach for me for the show, but you can put 4 NVMEs into it. So as far as building one, it's really not very expensive to build a 8 terabyte very, very fast RAID, and you can go up to about 32 terabytes, I think, maybe even 64 terabytes in this little box with NVMEs. Now, you can also build smaller NVMEs. I have a tendency to get these. These are, and this is just like a little. It is a. If I cover my eyes. This comes in just the enclosure, and then I buy the NVMe separately, and I build these for like little ones that I want to travel with. I've got a couple of those. I even got one with a fan. So I'm not sure if the fan makes any difference, but it made me feel better when I got it. But it turns red when it's on. It's kind of cool. So anyway, but I thought that it would make a difference in the speed, because one of the problems with NVMEs is they get hot and they get slow. So I don't know if it did or not, but I use those to capture. With these, I've been capturing 800 megs a second without any issue. So that's been pretty effective. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, one important note about this is that I am unaware of a camera that can capture directly into Thunderbolt 3. USB-C, right?
These are all
so
USB-Cs.
That's the important part.
Yeah, these are all
right.
USB-Cs that are there. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you're trying to capture this is for a Mac though. Yeah, so for a Mac, the problem with the T7s, the T5s had a little bit of a problem, but the way the T7s cache can be unstable. So basically, they work general purpose. The T7s work great. If you start moving lots of big files, or if you're writing files to them, if you're writing from an ATEM or you're writing from a camera, we found that the T7s were not a great experience for us. Next question.
Roscoe Jones, Madison, Indiana is writing. Would you consider the delay in Zoom small enough to use a large iPad for a 12-inch Interatron? Assumes you are printing the remote participant in Zoom on the iPad. And how easy is the image flipping in iOS?
I don't know how easy the image flipping is there. The iPad should be fine. I mean, you shouldn't have any significant latency that would make a difference there. Given that there's already latency in Zoom, it's really going to be tens of milliseconds, like low tens of milliseconds of delay. So I don't think that's really that big of a deal. I don't know how to flip the video in iOS. So a lot of the teleprompter software will do it, but I don't know how to do it as a core solution. Go ahead, Courtney.
I was just wondering, in the video settings of Zoom, isn't there a mirror my image? But it only may work on
but that's
your
video
image and
input, not output.
Yeah, not the output coming from the other people. So,
Yeah.
and it may not matter. If you're just doing it in Teratron, you're just doing eye contact. They may not even notice that it's reversed unless they hold up something with printing on it. So
we've never corrected that before. like we just you see the person on the other side, and they are reversed, and as Courtney said, unless there's text on them, you don't see it. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I've always just used iOS software because there's plenty of teleprompter software that'll do a simple flip in the iOS, but same problem.
Yeah, let's go to the next question.
All right, next question from Andre Duale, Berlin. Alex, any new findings regarding the Atomos Zato Connect?
It doesn't work.
That's a finding.
The finding is I haven't tried to stream it. But,
one.
So yes, if we are talking about specifically, if we're talking about the weather, so it may work in other areas. I haven't tested it with other things yet, but what I will say is in the realm of does a USB-C camera go via UVC to a computer? I cannot get any camera that I plugged into to pass video through it. So I don't know what's going on, but at least I have higher end USB cameras, I admit, but I can't get them to go through there. So I have not been successful at making that work. It may be power through, I don't know, but I'm powering the monitor separately. Now, I haven't sent it back yet because I do want to test it with I'm trying to test the concept of passing I want to test being able to pass just HDMI and stream it because it does have streaming capabilities built into the monitor. So the idea that I can put it on a camera and just stream to YouTube, I'm curious about that. Like I don't want to give it up until I've tested that part. Might as well do that before I send it back. But that's the part that I still have to take a look at. Next question. Sorry. I was in panel mode. I went into panelist mode. I just dropped into it with no warning. I'm
doing this over.
Well, don't go
over.
away. It's another question for Alex from Douglas Carmichael. Alex, you mentioned dedicating an X32 to mix minuses and comms. Does the X32 take the place of the comms base station?
In that case, it does. Yeah. And it's not something I necessarily recommend. Like, I'm just saying that we've done it where we go, we'll put a bunch of things in it and we have the X32 manage those things. But it does take some setup because it's doing mixed minuses. Now you're building more groups. And then there's, it's not for the faint at heart to put that together. So I would be careful with that one. But it does work, and we have done it, and we've done it on larger Dante systems as well. You're building a Dante. You can also do it in something like a BSS 806. Could build all that for you probably easier than using an X32. It's just the X32 is a lot cheaper. Next question.
Michael Weber, Foxborough, Massachusetts is asking, is Starlink a viable alternative to a bonded cellular device for streaming HD in the field, looking to cover high school sports in some areas where cell coverage is low?
It is, I would say it's good as a contribution to that bonded solution, but probably not good as a replacement of that bonded solution. So it's actually going to produce a better, we're testing it actually at my parents' house in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania, and they're getting up to 100 megs a second. Now you got to before that, they were getting up to 1.2 megs a second. so it has made a huge difference in their ability to do work there. So that has been, it's made a massive difference there, probably more of a difference. So I have the Starlink, the version 2, and the upside of it was, the problem was in where my house is, it was very hard to see enough of the sky for it to be stable. And also I have a pretty fast connection. I have an 800 down, 440 up. It wasn't like it was, it wasn't something I needed. I went ahead and spent the extra money to have it go mobile. But again, at my parents' house, it was a huge deal because it now makes a lot of things possible that weren't possible before. So we're trying to figure out where to fix it. But what I will say is that it still drops out. So you'll be like, do, and then there's like 40 seconds of nothing. And then, because there's times right now where if you can't see the entire sky, one satellite's leaving its aperture while the other one isn't quite there yet. Like it's not dense enough yet to hold it. And so these are getting better. It gets better every couple months. It gets more and more stable, but I wouldn't make it the replacement because you will have gaps. Now, as a addition to the bonded solution, it's going to give you a much better, much more robust solution than all the bonded cellular signals typically, especially if you're in a high traffic area like a parade. Next question.
From Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas. What's the best utility to monitor the heat index of your computer?
Go ahead, Bill.
I misread this in the beginning. I was thinking, what is a device to measure the heat index? And I will say that I've seen so many of the new IR little thermometers that do a good job of overall telling you if your computer is too hot. But I think he's looking for software to internally monitor it. And I'm not sure somebody like Jason or Courtney will have to figure that out.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, here's what I use to measure on my little tiny computers is from CPU ID called HW Monitor. And you can see here it's monitoring. This is a Melee computer, quad core. And you can see the temperatures on all of the each of the cores, and it'll show you collective temperature here. And you can have it listed out in centigrade or in Fahrenheit. It keeps track of the minimum and the maximum. So if it got over a certain degree, it'll show you, and you can reset those minimums and maximums. It also shows you the clock speeds of each processor, each core. So you can see that most of these cores, because I'm stressing them quite a bit by playing back these 9 HD videos in the background, that most of them are running at turbo speed. And when they're running at turbo speed, they're going to be running quite fast. And it'll also show you utilization up here in the processors, et cetera. So HW Monitor from CPU ID. That's the thing that I use. It's free. A free download, runs on Windows.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, and on a Mac, iStat menus is a nice, smooth little interface.
Next question.
From Alexander Knight, Vancouver, British Columbia. What's the difference in nomenclature between T and F when comparing cine and non-cine lenses aperture values? What do the letters stand for?
I believe, go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I think the letters stand for focal length and transmission. F-stops is a theoretical exposure value based on the aperture size, the focal length of the lens. That's a calculated value. And the T-stop is the actual measured value of the light as it's coming through the aperture on that specific lens. So lenses that are calibrated in T-stops are much more accurate as a measurement of the light that's reaching the film or the sensor. And then F-stop's theoretical for comparison, and T-stop is actual.
Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, what productions have you seen Touch Designer used on versus other video tools like Resolume?
I haven't personally seen Touch Designer used. so Resolume is more popular in the world. If you're comparing those two, I've definitely seen Resolume more. And I'm not, this isn't really my industry specifically, but in the ones that I've seen, Resolume has been more readily available than Touch Designer. Next question.
Gordon Lake here in Los Angeles asks, how do you choose a good walkie-talkie for production if you have more than 10 people and a low budget? Rather own than rent.
I start with the word Motorola.
Stole my comment.
It's just like so I've gotten lots of different belt back. We've used lots of different ones, and you can get. Here's the thing: is that for a lot of less expensive productions, I have a bag full of some cheap ones that I bought that are probably $20 a pair, or $15 a pair. And I have them in a bag that goes into my Crikey case. Like, hey, if something doesn't show up or if comms don't show up, I can talk generally 500 feet without a problem. It will. Most of these little toys will work okay, and Motorola makes those toys as well. They're for camping and stuff like that. And they have been. I mean, lifesavers in production. Like, so I just want to make sure it's clear. Like, it's not like they haven't been useful, but they're really inexpensive and they're not super rugged. And here's the big thing is channel operations. So it's hard to change the channels on the cheaper ones. Their transmission is more sensitive. They're more likely to break up. They usually don't have the same service supports on the side for what kind of headsets that you might want to use. And channel operation becomes really important. So on a good Motorola, you'll see someone who does this all the time, and you'll see them just kind of look up while they're turning their little dial, and they know where they're at. They know they're on channel 6 is production, channel 10 is cameras, channel whatever it is. They're sitting there just going and it's very clear and it's very accurate, and they can feel those indents, and they can get through those things. And so that's what you're paying for, when it comes to Motorola, and stability, the good battery life, transmission, working with these higher end Motorola. And I can't off the top of my head, I can't think of the production name for the Motorola's. The cheaper ones are not going to be that way. And then usually I throw in a couple Baofangs, which I don't know if technically you're supposed to use them in the United States. The transmission is like miles. And so we can talk to like the hotel that we were staying at the same time that we're there. And so usually I have a bag of those. Those are what we use as backup, but I would never use them I would never explain to a client why I had that why we were using that in the kit. So some of this comes down to, CYA. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, the Motorola does make a cheap, consumer radio that's the $44 for a 2-pack, so $22 each. The T100 talk about that uses the open frequencies. They have 22 channels. They're pretty weatherproof, it looks like, and pretty easy to operate. That's on the cheap side. The more expensive side that uses the higher frequency bands, or actually lower frequency bands, but are more expensive and need to be programmed. The Motorola programmable ones that you see used on the set all the time are maybe about 10 times as expensive. So, but if you're looking for inexpensive, I think these little ARRS, what do they call I can't remember the name of the Citizen, not Citizens band, but it's the equivalent of the open source band for transmission. It's non-licensed. In America, the rest of them do require licensing if you're going to use them in a commercial situation, the commercial band, but these are unlicensed.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
The good ones are also programmable. So one of the strategies that I used to use is I'd own maybe 5, and then I'd make sure that the rental house near me, you said you'd rather own than rent, I'd own those 5 so I didn't have to go for most of my productions. But I would want, if I needed to go to a crew of 10 or 15, to be able to go rent the additional 10 walkie-talkies so that I had a 15 position thing. So those little things are things to think about.
You go, Jason.
Years and years ago, so this is a Motorola talk about. What I liked about these is I looked around, and this is the MU350R. The nice part about this one is it has Bluetooth. So you can Bluetooth pair with a headset, and it's still just, a cheap UHF radio. But it'll pair with a headset, and that way you can get Vox working. You don't have to reach down and push. You don't have to use the annoying tiny little adapter for a headset.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, that is a good point, Jason. The ability to plug headsets in, because I looked around on some of these Motorola talkabouts. They don't seem to have, unless maybe they're covered up with a port that you can open up. They don't seem to have a 3.5 millimeter jack for a headset. I see. You're showing us the 3.5 millimeter jack.
It's not 3.5 millimeter. That's the annoying part. It's that tiny little proprietary one. Yeah.
So you'd have to have some custom headsets, but you could use it for an inner monitor in that case, in a pinch.
And I believe that the ones that we've used in the past are the CP200Ds. So those are the ones that are the ones that we use. They're $615 each, so they're good. The other thing to think about is when you're buying those, of course, and Gordon will know this. You're going to want to get the over the shoulder so that you can attach it up above as well. That makes it a lot easier to use. Next question.
Wrapping up the hour from Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, is autofocus a top reason for choosing Sony cameras over Blackmagic? If so, is there anything Blackmagic can do?
And the answer is yes. Autofocus, I didn't think it was that big of a deal until I was talking to a YouTuber and asked her why she's using Sony over Blackmagic, and she said, it's autofocus. Like I just and now that I have a Sony camera, I understand it's just a lot easier to kind of think through that. So I would highly recommend that if that's what you need. Autofocus is really hard, so I don't see how Blackmagic is going to fix that anytime soon. So I think that it's more of a cine camera, and the cine camera doesn't require you to go down that path. We're about to jump into our second hour. And we're going to go ahead and jump into the second hour here. And we have Kyle Urson and Eric Heighton here from Boomerang. And Kyle and Eric are specialists in ATA Carnet usage. Kyle has an extensive background in creating custom documents for temporary exports. And Eric has traveled all over the world as a cameraman with and without an ATA Carnet. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Can you describe, for a lot of our users, so a little bit of background. I reached out to Boomerang because I've used Boomerang for over a decade, and I don't think about anything else. I mean, I just go, okay, well, we're just going to get a Carnet, and we'll just sort this out. And when I first started, it was, I had no idea what I was doing. And I was sending stuff over, and Boomerang was nice enough to come back and go, it's not exactly what we need. so like, and then I'd send some more stuff over, and then we'd get to the airport, and we didn't know where to go, and we didn't know how to, what are these things for? And the reason I got into doing Carnets was specifically because I showed up in the Seychelles, and they were like, "Where's the Carnet for?" I had $200,000 worth of hardware, and for a shoot, and we talked our way through it. But it was very clear that if we had gone to a country larger than the Seychelles, we probably would not have been doing any production. So that's when we started doing the research and starting to make it work, and it just became seamless for us. And ours were probably some of the hardest because we didn't have the same Carnet that we would use over and over again. We built a Carnet for every show, and so everything. And we've had issues where they stamped the wrong page. They've done they've done a lot of other things. And so, but a lot of folks, if you haven't gone in and out of the country, a bunch of times and needed this, and as soon as you get to a certain ratchet, you have to have a Carnet for most of these countries. If you haven't done this, you don't know what it is. And when you first do it, it becomes hard. So what I'd love to do is have one of you just describe a little bit about what a Carnet is and why we even have Carnets.
I'll take that one. It's a internationally recognized and accepted customs document. And the whole point is without the Carnet, you show up to a country with $200,000 worth of kit. You can't financially assure to that foreign customs entity that, look, this is a temporary import. These goods are going in and they're coming back out. Once you cross their proverbial quote unquote customs line, you could turn around and sell the equipment in their country. They would be none the wiser, and you'd kind of beat the system as far as the import duties and taxes go. So without the Carnet or working with, a customs broker on a different form of temporary import, like a one-off bond, customs would levy import duties and taxes because you're not traveling with your suitcase and, maybe a small point and shoot camera as well as a laptop and $1,000 cell phone that everybody travels with. Personal effects are personal effects, but commercial and professional equipment, especially that of value, is subject to import duties and taxes, which can be quite hefty. They can range up to 40% of the value of the goods. So in your 200K example, nobody wants to pay $80,000 worth of their production budget on duties and taxes for something that they know is going in and coming back out. So because of the financial backing, most often posted in the form of a surety bond that goes behind the Carnet, customs knows that because you have a Carnet, there's a guarantee in place that says, look, this is going in, it's coming back out. And if for some reason it does not, you know that I have a Carnet, and you know that those duties and taxes are guaranteed to your customs.
And what is the process of getting? Can you describe like the perfect process of getting a Carnet?
First and foremost, if you don't have an account with us, you would set up an account. There's no cost or anything to do that. It's quick and easy online, but that gives you a portal to log into. And the web-based application is pretty intuitive. It should walk you right through it, but it'll ask for things like, what countries you intend on visiting, at least initially, because it is by and large a very universal document. That's one of the nice things about the Carnet is it's not trip or country specific, but as Alex, you notice, it is gear specific. So if you have a lot of rental or if you bring a different kit on each and every shoot, that's when you would need to get a Carnet. But You can also build like a master one where you list everything that you own and then piecemeal and choose what you want to bring. But it'll ask the countries. You're not bound or limited to those initial countries. You can add more as you go. And the pages, the certificates aren't country specific. There's just certain color ones for the origin country's customs, in my case, the US, and certain ones for foreign customs. It doesn't say you're going to Australia on there or you're going to Germany on there. So you can always order more certificates, but in the application will ask for the countries, the list of authorized representatives. So if you're hand carrying the goods with a crew and you're just checking it into the plane, it would be all your travelers, anybody that you want to give authority to handle it. Or if you have a very large production and you need to enlist the services of a freight forwarder, a shipping company to move the goods on your behalf, you would list them there. And then also where we're shipping it, because it is currently still and has been since the early 60s a manual hard copy paper document. They are working and pilot testing on the e-carnet, which is going to happen someday. But if you can imagine trying to get 90 or so countries that are a part of this system on board with both the technology and training to accept what's always been a paper document, it's definitely going to take some time. But I think what people find that the biggest task in submitting an application, especially in the production industry, is building what we call the Carnets general list. And it's kind of a deceptive term because it's not that general. It's a itemized list, each piece on its own line, things like make, model, and serial number, or any other identifiers that John Smith, customs agent, being completely ignorant to the film world, can say, okay, well, this is what's listed. This is what's in front of me. I can match it up to the number. And then once that application comes in, it gets assigned to a agent, a specialist like myself or Eric on our UK side of things. We practice a 24 to 48 hour turnaround time. So we, in addition to issuing the carnet, also help coach people on what should and shouldn't be listed on there, any country-specific requirements or restrictions. Again, it's really a universal system, but certain countries have weird nuances about them. We'll make sure your list looks good. We'll go through your itinerary, and then we issue it and send it out the door. Then once it's in your hands, it's between you and customs at that point.
And what should and shouldn't you include in your carnet?
I'm going to let Eric speak to that because he is much more in tune with the production world. So Eric, do you want to take over? And I think you're still on mute.
Oh, you're still on mute, Eric. There you go.
Hello. Hi. All good?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Carl, for that very good explanation of how it all works. So yeah, my particular sort of knowledge of this is traveling with the camera kit myself. I've been doing that for about 30, 35 years. So I've been in and out of many airports around the world, both with and without carnets. And it's just a very good tool to get you through the customs point. That's the other thing about it. I mean, Carl quite rightly mentioned that the carnet is this financial document that guarantees foreign customs that you're going to be good for the money if you do leave your goods in the country. But also it just explains to them very clearly what you're doing and how to and why you're there. So it's a very concise document that gets you through the customs point without any questions being asked, particularly. So it's good in that sense as well because it speeds things up. And you'll know that in our production world, time is critical because often you'll be landing in a country and you might have an appointment with say a government minister that afternoon that you've got a set time to interview, and you do not want to be held at customs for up to 4 hours, as has happened to me on a couple of occasions, while they go through all the paperwork and stuff. So it's a really good document just for getting things sort of lined up for customs to see what you're doing. And as Carl mentioned also that, they, as customs officers, aren't familiar with a red helium camera and a set of Cook prime lenses and, small HD monitors and that sort of stuff. So they need to have the list, and we're talking about the general list, which Carl mentioned. So when we coach our customers on how to prepare that list, we do make sure that the descriptions are good and clear. And, one thing that customers really do like is a serial number. And they tend to, I probably twice in my career, I've had the customs officers take everything out of every case and line it up.
That's not usual. That's not usual.
It's not, right?
And have you found it, like, so for us, what we told our folks that go, because we had people going in and out every week of, we were getting new carnets all the time. Mm-hmm. And number one is that I'm really interested in the idea of listing all of my gear, because we were specific, like we were so we wanted it to go so smoothly that if we changed anything in what we were doing, we were like, we're just gonna make another carnet. It's like, we're not gonna, it'd be the very last thing we did because we didn't want to have anything on the list that wasn't there or crossed out or anything else. But the thing that we told our folks on our side was we'd have a printout of every piece of gear with the serial numbers. This is not in the carnet. And what case it's in. So because we might be leaving in 15 cases, 23 cases, 43 cases, whatever that is. And because we would check those, our record is 42 cases of checked baggage.
Wow.
And so media rates is you can move 2 tons from the United States to Japan for about $1,300. And so anyway, but one of the things that we had them do is make sure they know what case it's in. And if they were able to grab the first 2 or 3 things and you walked right up to the case, opened the correct case, showed it to them, it wasn't worth the trouble. Like they knew that, oh, you understand it. Is that
it's exactly that?
Yeah,
it's exactly that. So basically, from the customs officer's point of view, they're seeing a load of stuff coming in. They don't quite understand it. They want to do basically a quick check. And you're right. If they say they'll look at the list and generally they'll choose the most expensive items. They'll pick out a CN20 lens because it's $45,000.
Right.
And they'll go, wow, that's a big thing. And they'll say, show me this lens. And you're right. If you can go to a case and open up case number 4, there it is. It says Canon CN20. It's got the right serial number. The customs officer looks at it, goes, big tick, check. He might check one more thing. That all lines up. You're good to go. And, you're right to point out that if that doesn't go smoothly and they choose something that hasn't got the right serial number, or you take ages to find, or you haven't got, then you've got a bit of a problem because you'll have to explain why.
Like most of life, customs is a confidence game.
Exactly.
It's a confidence game of them being confident that you are who you are.
Exactly. That you're not too shady, and you're going to be trustworthy. And once they find something that's not quite adding up, then they ask questions and it just starts to unravel. And you don't need that. So, as Carl says, and as you just reiterated, we make sure that everything in the boxes lines up and the descriptions are good and clear. So it's no good saying, and we have this with, actually, it's a good idea to just discuss non-camera kit just for a moment. Yeah. We have maybe engineering items going out. And I get a list from a customer who's going to do some maintenance on an oil pipeline or a boiler or something in Kazakhstan. And on the list, it says a JP74928 test machine. What is that? Right? Value $12,000 or $30,000. So we go back to that customer and say, well, hang on, if I'm a customs officer, how do I know what that is? Is it like a meter long? Is it 10 meters long? Is it worth $1 million? Right. So you've got to describe it in as much as saying, well, it's yellow. It's got a sticker on the front that says this. It's got a brand name. The more description you can give it and a serial number, then they'll understand. So, taking that back into our world, we have cameras. They're obviously what they are: red helium, Sony FS7, FX6, whatever it is. And lenses are easy. And then we get into things such as small HD monitors. Now, they don't quite know what that is, but you put small HD video monitor. So they know it's a little television set. Just things like that to help them understand what you've got in your boxes. And like you say, then it all adds up. They're very happy. They'll check 1, 2, maybe 3 things. And hopefully give you a big old stamp on the carnet and you're good to go. And then you get through, and it's just, that's the way to do it.
How do you handle putting, so if you have a rack full of gear and you have to show them serial numbers, of course, that's inside of a rack with a ton of wires on the back. How do you usually approach that?
Well, again, you could say, so let's say an outside broadcast vehicle sometimes goes aboard. Now, everything's racked out in structure. You've got the vision mixing console, you got everything there. You'd have to disassemble it and go in the back to see the cables all lined up and get the serial numbers. So you just describe it again. So you wouldn't just put a, I don't know, let's say you've got a mobile editing system or something that comprises 2 flight cases. You open them up, they've got lots of things in them. Then you just describe that. And you would also say maybe containing component parts, audio mixer, whatever it is, and you'd have the serial numbers. So if they really wanted to check, you could at least point to it and say that's it there, and behind is the serial number. But do you really want to see that? They probably don't. Again, it's a credibility check. What are they going to do? Like, have you there for with screwdrivers, take it apart and waste an hour of their time? It's not going to happen. But be prepared if they do ask these things, and sometimes they can, and sometimes you'll get someone, like I did in Australia, who's got nothing else to do for 4 hours, and says, let's just take these guys apart, right? And actually, the reason that happened is because it was the time of, there was foot and mouth disease. And we went into Australia, and they looked at our shoes, and my shoes had a little bit of grit and soil on them. And they said, "Where have you been?" And I said, "Well, UK, foot and mouth." That's why they stopped us. That's why they then took the Carnet apart. So it's little things that catch you out that just have this kind of snowball effect sometimes that get you into that system. So you want to be squeaky clean, squared away, and good to go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And because we found that if we printed serial number, like the serial, like just said S/N:, and put the number, and we print it on clear and put it on the front of the car, on the front of the device, they'd look at it and go, "Okay, that's fine." I mean, and you know, every once in a while they'd match the front one to the back one to make sure that but they all had them on the front of everything. So we had a rack and we put them all in the front. I mean, the reason I was excited to have you guys here is that, like, we had these huge meetings constantly about how we were going in and out of customs, you know, because we weren't doing it the way a lot of people should do it. They were, we just put it on a pallet and have it go somewhere. Like, we're checking things in and out with people who have never done this before. So it was lots of lower experienced production people moving through carnets. And so now tell us a little bit about the process of the carnet. So the first thing you do, you get to the airport and you got to find, customs is not it's usually the back end where people are coming out, right, of customs.
Exactly that. So obviously my experience is mainly leaving the UK, and the car will tell you about the US side. So most of the time we'll be traveling from Heathrow or Gatwick Central Airport. And you're right. Your first job before you check all your bags in is to go and contact customs. Reason for that? Well, if they want to check stuff, it's no good if it's already checked in and gone down the chute to the plane. They can't see it. But weirdly at Heathrow, you're correct. Most customs officers in all airports are airside, because they're interested in traffic coming into the airport from foreign destinations. They're not really interested in checking what's going out of the country. So at Heathrow, you have to go through the check-in area with your bags, go down a corridor, you turn right, and there's a red telephone on the wall. You pick it up. You say, "Hi, I've got a Carnet. I'm going to BA 243 down to Abuja. And can you come and check our Carnet?" Most of the time I'll say, "We can't because we're airside." And they say, "Go and check your bags in." And you go, "Really? Is that okay?" They go, "Yeah, check your bags through. Once you've gone through security, come and see us." Basically, they're the other side of the hatch where the red phone was, but they just won't open the door. And then you go and see them on your airside. But, you know, again, in our world, quite often the crew will be hand carrying, literally in the overheads. They'll be hand carrying maybe a camera body, some lenses. Pretty good for us because they're the expensive things that the customs officers are likely to want to see. So it's really good that you can go and show them those things, even though you've gone through security. And if they ask to see something that's actually been checked in, you say, "Well, you asked me to check it in, I've done that." So that is how it tends to work at most airports. They're always airside. But the procedure is definitely, as soon as you get your carnet, you have to have it validated and stamped by customs. So as you exit either the US or exit the UK, they have to validate it by stamping it. So you have got to see customs before you fly. If you don't do that, the Carnet front cover is not stamped. When you get to your foreign destination, customs will say, "Well, this is not a valid document," and they won't accept it. So it's crucial to do that.
And really what you're doing is building a chain of custody, right? So you're saying, the country that you're leaving says they left with this. And then the country that you land in says they arrived with this. And then when you leave that country, they said they're leaving with the same gear. And when they arrive again, they say they all arrived with the same gear. So there's kind of it's a paper trail that manages that chain of custody.
Yeah, correct. Because from the foreign customs point of view, what they're doing is they're logging that stuff coming in. So let's say you're going into Ottawa from the UK. Canadian customs want to know that now they have, let's say, $100,000 worth of, or pounds worth of equipment in their country. And they take the voucher out of the carnet and they put it in their filing cabinet. And they keep it there. When you leave, you go to customs, you say, "I'm exporting," and they get an exportation voucher, which tells them everything's gone. And then they look at those two vouchers, one cancels the other out, they're happy. If they haven't got the corresponding exportation voucher, then in the fullness of time, they'll check their filing cabinet and go, "Hey, do you know what? They didn't take this away." And they'll file a claim for duty and tax, which then we have to deal with. And there's ways of getting around that too. So it's important to get your carnet stamped out of the country.
Correctly.
Correctly. But actually, talking about customs and where to find them, that's really, really hard. So at Heathrow, I know where they are. I've just told you where they are because I know it because I've done it so many times. If I go to, let's say, Brindisi Airport in Italy, when I'm landing there, I have to go through customs. I get my bags off the carousel, and the last thing you do before you exit and get onto the road outside, you go through customs. You have to. They're there waiting for you. So you say, here we are,
Right.
customs, get your carnet signed in. When you come back and you're checking into Brindisi to fly home, nowhere on earth are you going to find customs without knowing where they are, right?
Right.
So the top tip I always say to people is, as you enter the country, when you've got customs there in front of you, you say, great, thanks very much. I'm coming back in 2 weeks or 2 days or tomorrow. When I come back, is there a phone number? Is there a name? Which door do I go to? How do I find you when I come back? And that's a really, really useful thing to do to get you ahead of the game.
We have moved mostly virtual, so we don't do as much travel as we used to, but we got into a habit of asking every airport where carnet, whether we were carrying gear or not. Your mission for any person that we were flying anywhere was to, before you leave the airport, you got to tell me where the where I'm going to process carnets. And so they'd be like, Narita is here, and they'd have this little map of this little line, and everyone would be constantly researching it because we were flying all the time, and even without the gear, we were always worried about it because it is, as you said, it's drama, and a lot of times you're a little late, you're a little whatever. You don't have time to kind of figure out what that process is. But I do think what's great is you also have some videos on the website, and I think it's great because I almost made those videos after I had a customs in the United States misstamp my carnet, and I got to Germany, and Germany's like the worst place to land with something wrong. I had to pull some serious strings to get my equipment in, to make it work. But how is it different? So you're checking those things in for Kyle. How is it different in the United States from your experience?
Same thing. You really got to put in the research. In addition to those videos on our website, we have a curated list of different airport/customs maps. We don't have them for every airport in the world, but everybody fawns over them because they're just such a valuable resource. It says, look, it's by this door. This is the procedure. We update them as soon as we get valid information. But if for some reason we don't, and they have phone numbers on there, always call ahead. Always call ahead, especially if you have a connecting flight. If you're not leaving from LAX to fly directly out of the country and you're going LAX to JFK, and you get that stickler at LAX and they see that they're not what they consider the final port of export, they might insist that you get it done at JFK. And if you could imagine all your gear being checked in, how are you reasonably supposed to be able to uncheck, make it through security, make it down to customs? So always put in the research and put in the time, call customs, don't rub them the wrong way, speak to them respectfully, say, look, we're going about this the right way. I'm doing a carnet. I know I got to get this validated. This is where the carnet people say your office is located. Can you confirm that that's still the case? And if not, what do I expect when I get to the airport? This is my flight day and time. What time do I show up? Logistically, how do I get down to your office? Because the last thing you want to do is be running late or scrambling and running around trying to find customs. And as Eric said, if you don't get your carnet validated and activated for export, it's essentially like you didn't have one. I had a client, it was a very sad story, actually. They got their carnet stamped and signed by customs. This was a couple months ago. They did get it stamped, but only on the yellow exportation counterfoil, the trip-specific certificate that marks the exit for that one. But they didn't activate and stamp and sign the front green cover. So they got to Portugal, and customs said, well, yes, you have a stamp on here, but this is not a valid carnet because they never put that activation stamp on there. And they had interviews lined up with refugees the following morning. It was a small passion project documentary, very thin budget. And they tried to work with a customs broker to file an alternative bond. It was going to take 3 days. They didn't have that time. They were there for 2 days just for these interviews. They ended up having to spend $12,000 in duties and taxes because they just found a reason to reject the carnet. So while it's a wonderful tool, it does require some finesse, and it does require you to put in the legwork and figure out where, when, and how you're going to get this validated. And if we don't happen to have one of the maps for your particular website, it's also part of our job is to coach you. We'll take you to the U.S. Customs website. There's a resource on there where you can find a phone number for any given customs office in the U.S. And the key is to call. Sometimes easier said than done. Sometimes you got to call a few times to get somebody on the phone. But yeah, usually, and exactly what Eric said is what I always tell people. When you enter the country, say, look, I'm going to be here for a week or whatever the case may be. What's my plan of attack for my exit stamp? So you know where you're going, what time you're showing up.
Yeah, and the one thing we definitely coach a lot of folks on is for our crews has always been, be direct, be nice,
Mm-hmm.
be calm,
Mm-hmm.
lots of eye contact. Like these are all things that don't seem like things that you have to worry about, but it's really easy when you haven't had much sleep and you're trying to get to your flight to get overwhelmed and kerfluffled, about what everything that's happening and be frustrated, and that does not improve the speed at which you move through customs. So so it's really important. Those are really important keys. Now, where do you cut off? Where do you go? You don't need to put this on a carnet. Do you go all the way down to every little item, or do you cut off at $300 or $400, or where do you kind of decide that we don't need to put everything on?
It's the $1 million question, especially in the production industry. I've had people list things down to 9mm rods and SD cards and,
right.
Things you don't or actually shouldn't put or can't put on a carnet is anything consumable or disposable. So your zip ties, your plastic baggies, AA non-rechargeable batteries, lens cleaners, any liquids, some gaff tape, anything that's not going to be returning in the same form, fashion, quantity, volume. And as Eric said, usually they don't do the most detailed inspections in most countries, but to me, it's better to take the time and list as much as you can.
Right.
I'll let Eric chime in as far as the minutia of nuts and bolts of the production world in general, but you really do want to be as itemized as you can. Obviously, personal effects, you don't need to list your personal laptop or your cell phone or stuff like that. But Eric, did you want to talk maybe about the minor value production stuff?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. It is a question we're asked all the time. And actually, if I may, I'm just going to show a couple of slides. If I can just do a screen share, if that's okay with everybody.
Yeah, it's fine.
So let me just get this up here and get this up here. Are we all seeing that?
Yep.
That
now
slide there. Yeah. Okay. So here's a typical thing. What else have we got here? This kind of stuff, right? Lots of small component parts that we have with us all the time. This is all for ARRI Alexa Mini. This is typical of what we carry. Now, in that box there are a ton of tiny bits and pieces, right? So you could go through all those and you could name them and describe them. I tend to think that's not truly necessary. Some people disagree, but in my experience, I know it's not necessary to list everything. So that contains, a mat box and some side chop wings and some flags and kit. But you describe that so there we go, follow focus unit. So it's got the focus rings, it's got some cables, got some little straps that go on the lenses. But that really is a fairly low value bag of stuff. So I would just call that follow focus accessories. Quantity 1,
Right.
weight 0.3 kilos, value £100 so you go through things like that. And again, you've got a monitor here. The monitor is the main thing. That's going to have a serial number, but the rest of it is just the connectors that go with it.
Right.
So
because our concern was also that we'd always be worried that we're going to list something that we don't have on the way out. And what I mean by that is it's some little wire or some little connector or something that got lost, the big stuff we keep track of, but if we list it, we're accountable for it.
Yeah, exactly. So you want to have some pretty ambiguous line items on your carnet.
Right.
The classic one we all know about, I think, is tools of the trade and accessories. We always put that on the end. And it has to be fairly low value. So, if you have an item at the end of your list that says tools of the trade and accessories, and you can have a couple of those, because you might have the sound recordist on your carnet, you might have the sound kit, you might have a first ACs kit as well. And they can each have their tools and accessories. So if you have that tools and accessories line value, let's say maximum $200, so it's not going to flag up anything. And that's where you'll put things like your Leatherman, some more connectors, some lens whites and bits and stuff like that. And also, if you've forgotten something small that's not on your carnet, put it in your kit bag. And if they ask what it is, well, that's in the tools of the trade. But you couldn't say, oh, do you know what? I want to take a set of ARRI CP2 primes, value like 30 grand. I'll put that in the line tools of the trade. That's not going to work, right? But, small stuff you can get away with. And you'd also have a line which would say things like HDMI connecting cables, quantity 10, value $10, make it small. So, no one's going to worry if you come back with 9 of those. because they're not worth anything. There's a threshold below which it will not be worth customs saying, okay, we're going to charge you duty on that item. So you want to have some little wiggle room in your carnets for that reason.
I think that's a perfect lead in to the on deck question here about when is it necessary to have a carnet in general? If in this example, someone said I'm traveling to Canada with a collection of.
Why don't we go? We'll read it out. Go ahead.
From
Robert.
Andy Korkendorfer in Vieira, Florida. He's asking this very question. I am traveling to Canada with a collection of Zoom gear for a lecture. Do I need a carnet to get into Canada and back into the US? Value is less than $2,000.
And Kyle, I know that you didn't raise your hand there, but go ahead and answer that.
Yeah, sorry. It's just a perfect lead-in because you don't ever have to have a carnet. There is no magical number. I think my record, I issued a carnet for a $20 value. It was a empty fire extinguisher for Lockheed Martin. And why they put it on a carnet is beyond me. It's kind of a compliance thing, but I've seen people, a lot of times with these lower values, people justify the carnet because of, for one, you could get charged. It handles both sides of the coin, both the entry into Canada, and then sometimes half the battle, if not more, is getting it back home and through U.S. customs. So you defer the duty and tax both entering into Canada as well as coming back into the U.S. And then also, if you're, it's valid for 1 year from the date of issue, and the more you use it, the more economical it becomes. I've got people that travel 20 times with a carnet throughout a year. So there's never a way to say you need to have a carnet, but just the ease of which you pass through customs. It's almost like an easy pass. They see your carnet, they may or may not look at a couple items, they stamp and send you on your way instead of sitting there and trying to explain your way out of it and say, oh, well, I didn't know it's low value stuff. It
takes all the stress out.
Exactly.
I know that every time I go to a country that I have to shoot in that doesn't have isn't part of the carnet system, it's a lot of stress. Like you get there and you're just not sure what's going to happen. And you're making tons and tons of phone calls trying to figure out what are the rules. Like in Ecuador, you have to send an invoice of the gear that you had, even though you'd already bought it. It was like, there's this weird paperwork thing that you have to create to get in and out. And you end up hiring a fixer to solve a lot of those things in country. And it's just so chaotic that it's really hard. John, I know before we jump out of this, I know that you had a more general question.
I had a very, very general question. I'm trying to determine the relationship between Eric's company, Media Carnet, and Boomerang.
Okay, I can answer that. Yeah. So Media Carnets is my sort of brand, if you like, for helping people out in the media industry. So it's a bespoke service. So when we service our clients mainly in the Bristol production area in London, they tend to come to Media Carnets because they get the expertise that I have, and I have that knowledge of their world, and I can talk to them about their own plans, and I've traveled. So that's what we do. The carnets are still fulfilled by Boomerang Carnets. So I apply for the carnets on behalf of the people, but using the Boomerang Carnets system. So it's still very much a Boomerang Carnets carnet, but the front end of it is a brand thing, if you like, and a point of contact that comes to me and my people here who deal with the media side. And we do a very good bespoke service, and we'll hand deliver carnets sometimes. And we're right in the hub. For instance, our Bristol office is actually inside one of the biggest rental houses in Bristol that serves all the natural history productions for Netflix, for Disney, for Prime, and the BBC. So we're really in the heart of it. So we can see the rental kit being prepared, and we can also prepare the carnet alongside it at the same time. So that's really why Media Carnets are so beneficial. But the relationship is just with the same thing, with the same people.
Yeah, and I think that as I got started, I probably would have had a specialist to work with us on it. We built, I don't know where we went before we went to Boomerang, but it was definitely a super stressful, painful process that we just barely survived when we did it. And it was, once we got to, I know for us, once we got to Boomerang, we had already gone through a couple carnet processes that were really painful, and it got a lot easier. But having someone that really knows your industry and being able to do that is really great. Courtney, I think you had a follow-up question for this, for the first question there.
Yeah, specifically on the Canada thing, because I've done work in Canada and run into problems with immigration because of work permits. And so if you have a carnet and you're listing a bunch of equipment as production equipment, business equipment, then they're going to ask you, well, what are you working on? And then if you're saying,
You
well,
can't say vacation.
Yeah, you can't say vacation. This is my personal equipment. And so there's a fine line that there's a certain amount of equipment that you can get in as just personal equipment. And in this example, if you're taking stuff for a Zoom meeting, it could be considered, a still camera and a microphone. And, it's just, but I want my personal equipment that I travel around as a tourist. They may not think twice about it. But if you say it's business equipment and you have a carnet, they're going to ask you to get a work permit. And then you have to go through immigration. You have to prove, you have to have letters from the people that you're working for. You can only stay in the current country a number of days, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in that case, the carnet may work against you if you want to just visit a couple of days and then get out again.
And to the point for you, for our experts here, it does change the way you have to handle your visas, right? I mean, like you're saying, when you have a carnet, you're saying we've always assumed that we have to have a work visa if we're bringing a carnet in, but technically you could say I'm just bringing this gear in. But when you start bringing a bunch of Pelican cases in, it does bring up a couple questions.
So I have some experience with that too. The Canada thing, you're right. Canada HR are very, very hot on this, and they do not like people coming in. And I had a shoot that I was based in northern Montana, up at Glacier National Park, and every day I was driving across the border into Alberta with my carnet. Now, I did have a work permit, but it was very, very hard to get. And, I would not recommend flagging that up. So you're right. If your value is as little as $2,000, then going to Canada, I would carnet is definitely the way to go if you can do it and you get the permit. But there's a very good chance you'll get in under the wire, so to speak, with just a Zoom recorder and a few bits of personal gear. People phone me and say, well, look, I've got my stills camera, DSLR, and I've got some fancy lenses. And very quickly, even as a keen amateur, you're going beyond the threshold of what would be considered carnet. And it's not just the dollar value, but it's the fact that from customs point of view, again, you could be taking this into their country and selling it on the black market and not paying tax and duty. So I think if you can just convince customs that it's my DSLR, my Zoom recorder, I've got a couple of mics, I'm going to film some, I'm going to go do some like sound recording of birds, whatever it is, then, you probably will get away with it. But it is that negotiating thing that you're into and just convincing customs that you are what you say you are. Yeah.
Yeah. I've spent a couple hours in Canada by not being totally straight.
It's difficult.
I
was nearly sent home. I couldn't believe it. I nearly had to go home again. And I'd done all the hoops, and I got a special contact, a guy called Darcy Warner at the airport when we got there, flying in, and everything was squared away. I talked to him on the phone from the UK about 5 times. The production company, the BBC, had done it. And yet when I got there at 2 a.m, my producer was waiting for me outside the airport. Darcy said, you know what? I'm really sorry. I don't think you can come in. And we just had to really hash it out. It's very tricky, Canada. Yeah. Be warned.
Next question.
Well, I have a question from here in Los Angeles. At what point do you know production is large enough to need a carnet?
And I think you kind of covered that a little bit in the sense that it's when you want to stop thinking about it. Is that about the right?
Kyle, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think we did kind of cover it, but there's just unfortunately not a magical number. It is usually, people do travel with a small point and shoot camera. You can say I'm a hobbyist. I happen to have some prosumer grade equipment. I'm on vacation. I'm here. I'm going to take some pictures and some video for, just my own, enjoyment, my own practice. And you can get through. You just, unfortunately, it sounds like such a cop-out answer. You don't know who you're going to get in customs until you get there. You could have that one guy who says, yeah, no, not a problem. Or you could have that one guy who wants to match up each and every serial number and says, questions everything, just based on the mood they're in that day. And as unfortunate as that sounds, it's the case. They're kind of the gatekeepers. They say jump, you say, how high, sir? But I would say once you start carrying Pelican cases and stuff like that, that not an average hobbyist would carry, is when it's always a better idea to have a carnet. I mean, if you're carrying just one small little camera and even maybe a nice lens, that could be posed as personal equipment. But when you start wheeling cases behind you, you've got light stands, you've got tripods, you've got all sorts of stuff like that. That's usually when you're going to get tipped off.
Next question.
From Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas. He's wondering, what is the time limit for entering, exiting various countries with your gear?
Good, Kyle.
And I raised my hand on that one because I'm wondering. There's a couple ways to look at that question, and it's an interesting posed question because the validity of the document itself is always 12 months from the date of issue. So your carnet and your bond are good, at least with the U.S. issued bond. It's always valid for 12 months. So you can come and go as you please to various different countries. You might have to order some additional certificates if you need to make future trips, but the carnet itself is valid for 12 months. Now, most countries will allow you to stay for that full 12 months on any given entry. So if you've got an extended production and you are shipping, $500,000 or $1 million worth of camera equipment over to a country that is going to be in there for 10, 12 months, most countries will allow for that. Certain countries, though, do have a little bit stricter of on any one given entry, how long they want you to be there at a time. Perfect example is India. Prior to 2019, actually, India did not accept carnets under the classification of professional equipment, which, of course, camera gear falls under. They were only signatory to the Convention of Exhibitions and Fairs. So for like trade shows, special events, I mean, if you were working with a fixer, usually they can get you through with camera gear. You say you're here for XYZ event to film it, and you're not carrying a trade show booth under your arms, but you are there for an event. So they're kind of loosely defined. But once they signed on to the Professional Equipment Convention, they have a caveat that on any one given entry, they limit to a 2-month import length. Now, you can ask for an extension. They will honor one extension up to another 2 months, but the total you'll have in India with your camera gear is 4 months at a time. Mexico, for instance, they limit to a 6-month import. Again, you could go there 20 times for a week at a time throughout the year of the carnet's validity, but on any one given import, they don't want you there longer than 6 months at a time. Most of these countries that do limit, they will accept or honor extensions. In Mexico's case, I almost wish they said they didn't honor them because it's a very, very tedious, to say the least, process, and sometimes it doesn't go through correctly. But by and large, most countries will allow you for the full 12 months. And I hope I'm answering that question correctly.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good detailed answer for that. Because I think some of the reasons they're trying to do that is to keep people from doing, in some cases, we've done things where we needed to keep it there for a long time and we took it out for a week and brought it back. Like in over two, so then that's 2 years of it sitting there. And would you suggest so what happens, you bring something in on a carnet, and then the client says, or the person, your partner says, hey, I'd really like to keep this equipment. Is the best thing to do is to take it out and then bring it back in? I mean, like it's rather than trying to change the carnet. Like what's the best way if you decide you want to keep the equipment in country? What's the best process?
Permanently, you mean?
Yeah. Like so, you're working with someone and they're like, I really want to keep that thing, or you've realized you really need to keep it here for a long time. Is it better to take it out and then just bring it in properly, or is it better, or is there a way to negotiate? Like, hey, we brought this on a carnet, but we're gonna leave it here.
Well, first quick answer is that if you're leaving it there longer than the 12 months, but it's not permanently staying there, most countries will accept a quote unquote extension carnet. It's called a replacement carnet. Mm-hmm. It's used to extend the stay, usually up to another 12 months. In the foreign country, I've seen people get 2 or 3 replacements, so 3-4 years at a time. Right. That's on a case-by-case basis, of course. But if it's for sure permanently staying there, one of the nice things about the carnet is you do not need to bring it back out and then file it as a permanent import coming back in, especially with freight costs. If it's going with the freight forwarder, what freight costs are nowadays post-pandemic. But there is a way to break that liability and approach customs and say, okay, this was initially brought in as a temporary import. It came in under a carnet, it came in under a bond, but now it's going to remain in country. Of course, duties and taxes would be levied at that point, right? But there's a way to do that without re-exporting and re-importing. It happens a lot in, not so much in the production world, but in like the commercial samples world. If you're a jeweler, right, and you're going to a trunk show in Italy and you've got 100 pieces of fine precious jewelry, and your intent is you hope they all sell at the show. Right. Well, reality is maybe half do and half don't. You use the carnet as a tool to defer the duty and tax on anything that does come back out.
Oh, that's great. It's definitely, that's new for me. Next question.
From Vincent Alvarez. Bellington, Washington, what happens if you were to lose a very expensive piece of equipment in the foreign country, say at the bottom of a lake or a bigger than planned explosion? Would the carnet have to pay then upon exit?
Go ahead, Eric.
Yes, strictly speaking, you do. And this is quite a brutal thing. So not only have you lost your camera or lens or your drone, but you've now also got to pay the import duty and tax on it, because as far as customs are concerned, it's in their country. And I think the exception is if you can prove that it's being destroyed, if you have evidence that it's burnt or you've got the thing that's wrecked and it's just a piece of charred mess, then even then you bring that back to customs to show it to them because you're exporting it. But if you physically don't have the item, I have a drone sitting at the bottom of the Hudson River, for instance, on a carnet that we took out 3 years ago. And we just had to say to customs, it's not here. It just got ditched in the river. And we had to pay the export. Well, we didn't actually. They didn't charge us because at the end of the day, they're the customs officers as you exit New York. And he just said, well, it's fine. Don't worry about it. And that was at his discretion. It wasn't a high value drone. It was a small sort of, it wasn't even I can't remember. It's a small thing. It's like, maybe $2,000 worth. And they just thought it wasn't worth the hassle. So, but yeah, if you've got something bigger than that, you are going to have to pay the tax and duty on it unless you can prove it's been destroyed, which is quite hard.
Do you know if does insurance typically cover those kinds of the extra duty that might have to be paid if you have loss? Not usually. It'll pay for the hardware.
Yeah, I was having a conversation like this morning with the camera crew because I think one thing that people sometimes don't quite understand about the security bond is that you put the security bond up, and Kyle, tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I think, our underwriters will pay that out, but only if you, the holder, can't pay it first. So you as a holder are still liable for the import duty and taxes. They come to you first. If you aren't able to pay because your business has gone bust or something, you're not around anymore, then there's that real backup guarantee that the security bond will pay out and the underwriters will pay the money. So it's important to understand that. And therefore, I was talking to this cameraman today and suggest that if he was worried about that, he could go to his insurance broker, the people that insure his own equipment for loss and damage, and maybe ask them to tack on a policy for up to £20,000 worth of import duty.
Right.
Should it become payable? And I think it's very unlikely to happen because the equipment we travel with, we're going to look after. We take great care of our camera equipment and we make sure we know where it is. We don't leave it lying around and get lost. So the chances of it getting lost or destroyed are pretty slim, actually. So I think it's probably over worrying about it, really.
Right. Absolutely. Next question.
From Roscoe Jones in Indiana, Madison. If this is still a paper document, what happens if it is lost, stolen, or destroyed?
Go ahead, Kyle.
Yep, I've heard everything under the sun. They've fallen off the side of boats. They've gotten left on planes. Someone's child threw it in their family fire, and we got a half-burnt carnet back in our office. It is a paper, and it's limited to that. But within the first 12 months, if it's lost, stolen, or destroyed, you can apply for what's called a duplicate carnet. It's not a new bond. That bond is an electronic bond that carries over, so you don't have to pay the new bond premium again. It's just a new set of paperwork, and there's a cover letter that's attached to it that explains, okay, this is the original carnet number. It was lost. This is the one that replaces it. It's the same carnet number, but it ends in a /S1. So it stands for substitute one, but you essentially just get a duplicate and you continue on from there.
And what happens though, if you're halfway through it? So that you've got a certificate that's been stamped, you got to the other country, you had it stamped on the entry, and then you lost it in the other country. And then you're asking for a replacement. That gets complicated.
Exactly. It does. And sometimes I've seen customs ask questions about it, but you don't need to go obviously retrace your steps and get all the import and export stamps. Obviously, those moves have already happened. But what does need to happen is it still needs to be activated and stamped and signed on the front green cover page by US or whatever the origin country's customs is. So we actually offer a service where we can run it down to customs for you and have that activation stamp taken care of. And then we send it directly to you overseas to marry up with you. And again, it's got that cover letter explaining, okay, this is the situation. The first one was lost. This is a duplicate to replace that. And it still has been activated by US Customs. So it's still a valid carnet because that front stamp is on there.
You go ahead, Courtney, real quick.
And does it help to take a picture of it after it's been stamped and you enter in the country,
100.
so you have some kind of proof that it was stamped and did enter the country?
100%. I always recommend take pictures, make scans at and every point in the process. When you get it, before you take it out, once it's stamped on the US side, once it's stamped on the foreign side, because you have that at least digital paper trail, so to speak, of what happened with the customs validations.
Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, when relocating to another country, do you have to pay import duty bringing your own equipment in, or is there a similar process for duty exemption?
It's more of a customs question than a Carnet question, I think. But it's if you're moving and you already owned all this equipment, do you have to pay the duty to bring it in?
I know of one instance where a client relocated to the UK. They used a US Carnet, moved to traveled to the UK, fell in love and got married and became a UK citizen. And he was working with a broker to file some sort of an exemption. Now it's outside of our realm of expertise, but I'm not sure if it's a full duty exemption or not. But there are things for nationalizing goods, but sometimes you do still have to pay the duty and tax.
Next question.
Paul Wallace from Austin, Texas is asking, how does boomeranging gear to Canada differ from other countries?
Eric, do you want to take that one?
Okay.
It doesn't really. You can still take equipment from the US to Canada on a Carnet. You can go from the UK to Canada on a Carnet. So there's no major difference involved, except, as we mentioned before, it does flag up the need for a work permit, which Canada is very, very hot on. So be aware of that. And don't just expect that you can just walk in to Canada with a Carnet and a load of filming equipment, because questions will be asked more about your reasons for being there than the actual Carnet itself.
Are there certain countries that you think are more sticklers than others? Do you find that it flexes back and forth?
As Kyle said, it really depends on who you see on that particular day. I mean, we're having a lot of issues with French customs post-Brexit.
Interesting.
They're not our friends. And honestly, sometimes it is blatantly vindictive. Honestly, they're just being difficult. And they fine you. They get poor guys coming saying, they've been fined 150 euros for incorrect paperwork for no reason. And other times they let you through. So I don't think there's anything country specific. China's difficult, but then China is, for all sorts of regulatory reasons. Yeah, Pakistan was difficult because, again, they did not understand the Carnet system. So they're scratching their heads.
A lot of times
wondering what to do with it.
We found that to be the case. So you go into a country that maybe that airport or that person, it hasn't seen a Carnet in a long time. We find that for some reason in Japan, Rita, we found that it was always like, oh, we have to figure this out. Someone would come over and they'd look at it and try to figure this out. Whereas like Switzerland and in the Netherlands, they barely cared whether you had one or not. Like it was just kind of like, yeah, whatever, we'll pass this through. They never wanted to look at anything. They just want to keep you going, through the system. And, but again.
Well, that's an interesting point. There's also been times when I've been, and this happened in America. I think it was Denver. I can't remember. It was a while ago. And they basically, you go to the customs desk and they say, oh, no, you don't need that. That's fine. You can go through. And I say, actually, no, I do need this because of my Carnet. No, you don't need that. You can go through, because they don't care. They don't want to do it, right? And funnily enough, I managed to get this lady to actually stamp my Carnet into Denver. And she said to her colleague, she said, Margaret, file that in the 411. And she took the Carnet away. And I said, what's the 411? And she said, it's the shredder. And I think that was Denver. I mean, it's like, so there are all sorts of people who look after Carnets a different way. But it's fine from our point of view. I had the Carnet stamped. I didn't really care. That's fine.
Well, and I think it's important for us to know exactly what the process was. I know that I mentioned that before. In Germany, I had I landed in Berlin. I had the officer in the United States had stamped the wrong page, and I hadn't paid attention to it. I've done a lot of them. I just didn't get it right. We had to make phone calls. Like German customs was not going to allow that through the system. So you do have to we have to know, as the person leaving the country, what it, how this actually works. That's one of the reasons I want to bring you guys on, is to make sure that people understand there's those resources out there to do that. But you have to, it's not just them. Like you have to know, because like if they don't want to stamp it on the way out, well, you're going to get to the other side and they're not going to, they're going to want it on the other side.
You'll be the one coaching the customs officer on what to do very carefully and tactfully. But if you can guide them the right way, then that's helping them out.
We've done that many times. Like, oh no, that's not the page. This is the page you want to stamp, and you need this part here. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, for a very large shipment like a major tour, is the copy of the carnet attached to each case, or is there some master file that is sent in advance to the destination country?
Good comment.
I think that's a great question. There's only one copy of the carnet. I mean, we always recommend you guys carry copies or make copies just to have that record. But unless you get a duplicate, there's only the original one hard copy. So usually what happens with a large shipment, like we issue carnets for statewide orchestras, tens of millions of dollars worth of equipment on carnet. Obviously, nobody's going to hand carry that. It's going with a freight forwarder. What usually an experienced shipping company will do is they'll bring all the freight to the port, whether it's going by air cargo or going on a vessel by sea. They'll present the carnet, they'll present the freight. If they want to do an inspection, they do their inspection. They'll get the carnet validated by U.S. Customs, then put the equipment on the plane or on the boat. Do not send the carnet in a shipping pouch just slapped to the side of the crate, because it's just going to get lost. Again, it's a paper document. So they'll courier then the original carnet to their counterpart, be it their company or their partner company or their customs broker in France, who's then got the carnet in hand, waiting for the freight to arrive and then clear it in. Usually you don't want to send the carnet with it, and there's not, multiple copies of it.
And another company we may bring on at some point that manages that for us is Rocket. So Rocket is the one that we
entertainment industry.
Yeah. So I was at a place called Rocklitz, and Rocket has their whole space there just to get stuff in and out of the country. So, or to ship things. And I will say that once you get to a certain level, I would just use someone like that to get it in and out, not try to do it yourself. Next question.
From Bill Davis from San Diego and here on the panel, are there destination countries that are problematic and want under the table consideration to approve things?
So I would never recommend the under the table approach. Yeah. I think you're going to get into massive problems. I haven't come across that. The place I almost came across it was, again, with all due respect to the guys, because they were absolutely brilliant in the end, was going into Lahore in Pakistan. And they had accepted the carnet, and that was fine. But he said, I also need a cash deposit. And when you hear the words cash deposit, you think, well, what's this about? But we negotiated with him, and he was a uniformed officer. He was absolutely fine. And I think we gave him something like maybe $500, which he put in an envelope and put in his desk, and we were on our way. And we thought, we're never going to see that again. But 3 weeks later, when we came back, we'd gone through the carnet process. The same guy came out and said, excuse me, gentlemen, wait. Here's your money back. And he gave us the envelope with all $500. So I don't know what that was about, but that's the closest I've come to ever thinking I've been asked to give something under the table, but I would never offer it. I think that could be very, very problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never had to do that, in a lot of different countries, because usually once you're in that position, their job is worth way more to them than any chance of losing that job, to one of those things. Next question.
From Jason Beige, Albuquerque, New Mexico, and here on the panel, while I assume it's not necessary, do diplomats use carnets to transport equipment for their use abroad?
Do you know if diplomats do that?
I don't really. I imagine they don't, but I don't know.
Usually, there's immunities or exemptions in place for stuff like that, but we do carnets for government entities, DOEs, fully federally funded entities, because they still need to bring stuff abroad. As far as diplomats themselves, I've seen people travel with diplomats, and they have a carnet for their stuff, but oftentimes there seems to be some sort of exemption or immunity for that.
Fantastic. Kyle and Eric, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
It's so key. And, there's people that are watching right now that probably didn't know what a carnet was when we started the conversation, and you may not need one for the next year or two, but you'll come back. Just flag this conversation so that you can watch it again when you actually have to start taking gear out of the country. So, I just think it was such a nightmare when we got started. And again, the reason we reached out to Boomerang was because they made it a lot easier, and we used them probably on a weekly basis for years. So really, really great experience. Thanks to the producers for all those great questions, asking all the questions that we had here today. We can't do this without your questions, so get those questions in early every day. We're going to have accessibility tomorrow. We're going to be talking about brainstorming about accessibility tomorrow. Think about those kinds of what you might want to see more of in those accessibility issues. And thanks to the panelists, we can't do this without you either. Great first hour and second hour with all of you. And thanks to the incredible crew, we've got people all over the world that light up every day, a small village, to get this show done. We've got the development team, the management team, and the production teams that are making all of this possible. And we really appreciate all of your contributions. We traveled 62,000 miles. That's 100,000 kilometers today answering these questions. And that is 495 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours.
Show. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, everybody.
Do you need a carnet for those bananas?
That many?
That would be a carnet autovata.
Yeah, with 495 million, I think we'd have to file a carnet. Then we'd have to have it sit in customs, get ripe.
Are we off air now?
Audio-wise, we're still rolling through the credits. They can hear you. They can't see you.
Whispering. Now I think we're off.
Chad will tell us.
Yeah, we'll be all clear in a minute.